Hey folks, this is Bryan here at West Davidson Public Library, and I'm here today to share a very special video with you where we're going to focus on one of the books in our, a trilogy of books in our young adult fiction section. Today I'm going to be telling you about March, books 1, 2, and 3. March was written by Congressman John Lewis and Andrew Aden, and it was illustrated and lettered by the artist Nate Powell. It's an autobiographical trilogy of graphic novels about the civil rights movement, and it won a long list of awards. So long, in fact, that I will have to read from a list. I apologize. Book 1 won the American Library Association's 2014 Coretta Scott King Book Awards Author Honor, and it was the first graphic novel to win a Robert F. Kennedy Book Award. Book 2 was awarded the Eisner Award for Best Reality-Based Work in 2016. If you're not familiar with the Eisners, either yourself or from earlier videos I've reviewed other titles in, it's kind of like the Oscars of comics. It was not the last one it won. Book 3 debuted #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list for graphic books, and that brought the whole trilogy into the top 3 spots for 6 weeks. Book 3 won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature, the first graphic novel to do so. Another Eisner for Best Reality-Based Work, again, and the Coretta Scott King Book Award Author's Honor, again. And also won the Michael L. Prince Award and the Robert F. Siebert Informational Book Award and the YALSA Award for Excellence in Nonfiction for Young Adults. And all those awards are why we decided we wanted to tell you about it, along with the recent unfortunate passing of Congressman Lewis. The autobiographical part of this series is on behalf of him. He was a famous civil rights leader, and he was also a U.S. congressman. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives for Georgia's 5th Congressional District from 1987 until his death. He also served as the chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee from 1963 to 1966. He was also famously one of the Big Six. They were leaders of various groups that organized the March on Washington in 1963, alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and others. And in 1965, Lewis led the Selma to Montgomery marches across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. That event was later known as Bloody Sunday because of the terrible violence that broke out when they attempted to march over it the first time. And that event is actually what starts this series. That is the beginning of Book 1. And Book 1 serves in comic terms as what you would call the origin story. After it shows that the beginning of the terrible violence at that event, it drops from there and it moves to a different setting. It moves to a framing story that goes throughout the entire trilogy, and that framing story is set during the inauguration of President Barack Obama. And on the day of the inauguration, he meets 2 children who are there visiting with his mother in his office, and they unexpectedly meet him. And there, they ask him questions about him and his life and how he became who he is. And he tells us that story in Book 1. He grew up as a child in Alabama. He was the son of a sharecropper who was in charge of taking care of the family's chickens. And early on in his life, he had every intention of being a preacher. He talks about all of that. And throughout that framing story, where he moves away from the children to meet other people and continues through that day, we learn more stuff about how his life changed. And we learn how this would-be preacher became a famous civil rights leader, and how he became, first he became a dedicated student and then became a civil rights leader. Most of it centers on his work with other students and what would eventually become the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And with that group, and the first book centers on their work where they staged sit-ins in downtown Nashville, Tennessee, that eventually led to the desegregation of those lunch counters. And so this Book 1 is pretty much the story of him and his becoming a part of the civil rights movement and his early work in that. And that serves as that origin story, as I said, for this trilogy. And that leads us to Book 2. Book 2 of March, it actually picks up when the Freedom Riders began to challenge the non-enforcement of desegregated public buses in the southern states. I have been describing Book 2 to my friends and coworkers who know I've been reading it as a harrowing read. It chronicles the escalating violence against the protesters in the civil rights movement. Um, it's not a happy read at all. Some of the events depicted in it were ones I had heard of. Some of them were not, and they all broke my heart. Um, like I said, it's not something that when you read it that I would necessarily say I loved reading about, but it was something I felt like I needed to read about. And I'll talk about that more as I get into book three. I will say it's not all just that. It also details the events of the Big Six, as I described earlier, as these six civil rights leaders meet and plan the March on Washington. And it talks about everything that went into that march and making it a success and making it a peaceful demonstration, and the importance of that event. It is not what ends the book, though. Book two ends with the infamous Birmingham church bombing, and it makes for a pretty brutal ending to what was already a pretty brutal read. But it sets the stage for book three really effectively, because as brutal an ending as that was in book two, it is an even more brutal introduction in book three. Book three details the event, the Birmingham church bombing, in greater, I hate to say after saying detail, it details it in greater detail. And it talks about what happened during that horrible day, and it talks also about the aftermath and other things that happened with it. And it continues to document other horrible things that happened to these folks in their pursuit for equality and freedom. And it's a difficult read. Like I said, I had to take a break from the second book when I finished. Actually, I had to take a break from the series after reading the second book. I had to take a night off, and I finished the third one today. And like I said, it's a difficult read. It's something that I wouldn't say, but you can't honestly say that I enjoyed reading it, because it wasn't something that was fun. But that doesn't mean I don't think you should read it. You should definitely read it. You should definitely read this book. I'll say that while it's a difficult read because it's so troubling, to paraphrase John Lewis, it's a good kind of troubling. It's something that should trouble you. It reminds me of two books that I love. It reminds me of Eric Maria Remarque's excellent book, All Quiet on the Western Front, and it also reminds me of the autobiographical Night, which was written by Elie Wiesel. And like those two books, they're not books that you read for fun. They're not books you read because you enjoy them. You read them because you should. And the horrible things that happen in this book are something that you need to know about, and you need to know about them so that you can make sure that nothing like them ever happens again. That's the reason to read these. And while I've painted a pretty grim picture of these books, I will say that it ends, despite all that, it ends on a note of happiness and hope. It ends with that important message. It also, however, does have the message that the work it describes is ongoing and still going on and will continue to go on, unfortunately, probably. It is something that is a necessary read. And in the spirit of that hope that it ends on, I hope you will read these books. We have them available for you in various platforms. We have them available on the Libby app. We have them available on ncdigital.overdrive.com. And we also have, as you can see, physical copies here on the shelf at West Davidson Public Library. And if you have any questions about reading them, just contact us here, and we'll be happy to tell you how to look at either one of those digital platforms, or we can get you a hold on any of these copies. I highly recommend it. I will say, because of the subject matter and the events that it depicts, it is definitely a young adult fiction book. It is only appropriate for teens and older. But for any teens or any adults, I can only give this my highest recommendation. It is definitely worth reading, especially in memory of the man who wrote it in his recent passing. Check it out, either here or on those platforms. And once you have, let us know what you thought of the book in the comments below. Once again, I want to thank you for listening to a very special video here at West Davidson Public Library. And I hope to hear from you soon about checking out this book. Thank you.